Welcome back, everyone. So today, the title of our video is Arculf and the Maronite Chronicle. And why am I returning to these 7th century sources? Well, I don't know if you've been watching, but there was a lively debate between TooManyMary's, or perhaps I should say TooManyMary's, and Robert Spencer. Very gripping debate. Obviously, I thought Robert Spencer's arguments were much more persuasive. TooManyMary's arguments basically were a defense of the Hadiths, by and large, even though she denies the Isnads. But essentially, in every case, her argument falls down on the side of a belief, a general belief that the standard Islamic narrative is essentially true. And even at the very end, she went so far as to say that even if we were to disprove the existence of Muhammad, she still held out belief that the Quran came from Mecca, which is unbelievable, which is probably the least likely place in the world where the Quran could have come from, considering it's a place with essentially no water, no culture, and all the rest of it.
So if Muhammad did not exist and he was made up, I would still locate, like if it could be proven and just rip everything out, destroy it all, I would still locate this religion right in the area that it came from. I would say that, well, it was still Mecca. Like, Muhammad's gone. Everything's blasted out of existence. I would still go, nah, Mecca is where it came from, one way or another.
Much more plausible that these are stories that were developed over a long period of time by a large number of people, that the stories in the Hadith are full of contradictions because they were produced by rival factions with different agendas, often competing, and then explanations were fabricated for the contradictions themselves, and that's where we get the doctrine of abrogation and things of that kind. And so that actually is a simple explanation, the simplest possible explanation for the events. This is something that makes a whole lot more sense than thinking that they got all of Islam by 632, they codified Quran by 653, and promptly shut up about it entirely for another 50 or 60 years. That doesn't make any sense at all. And so when you're talking about the simplest possible explanation for events, that's what we're looking for here when we question the historicity of Muhammad. And it's not at all a distraction from any important inquiry because...
1 minute, sir.
Thank you. In the first place, you have... it's very important to note that Muslims believe this stuff. And so we still have to talk about its immorality, its irrationality, its violence, it's calling evil good and good evil, and so on. That's absolutely true. We have to keep doing that. At the same time, it is a tremendous challenge that the Islamic apologists have no response to and have never even attempted to answer, that is making great inroads into Islam itself now. Witness Yasser Qadi, one of the most prominent Muslim clerics in the United States, who has just declared that the Hadith literature cannot be supported by the historical critical method. So you're more of a believer than Yasser Qadi at this point. And that is a very difficult situation to be in because Yasser knows what the evidence is.
Your time is up.
Thank
you. I would recommend that you go and see the video for yourself. If I were to do a debunking of all of the errors that I saw on Mary's side, I wouldn't have time to do anything else for the coming year. I zeroed in on a couple of small areas, or at least what I thought were small areas initially, and I couldn't believe what I found when I started deep diving into it. And it only strengthens my confidence in the fact that the standard Islamic narrative has holes in it, and I'm quite happy to say that I am on the side of those who doubt the standard Islamic narrative. I should say, really, as a reminder, what is the historical critique? Um, Mary described it as fringe. She described people who do the historical critique as mythicists, and she described her own focus as normative historical critique. Okay, now that's her description of what I do and what people who describe themselves as attempting, at least, um, a historical critique. I see what I do, by and large, when I'm not trying to come up with an explanation, when I'm just looking at what's there and examining the evidence. What I'd like to think I'm doing is a fairly rigorous fact checking to the extent that it's humanly possible. That's what I think the historical critique is. It's not about creating mythical hypotheses. Some people get into that, and people always ask for an explanation based on the limited evidence. What do you think actually happened? And yes, of course, we're all tempted to um, leap forward with an idea and a hypothesis, but actually, that's not really what the historical critique is. That's kind of maybe your human response to the evidence, but actually, the historical critique is first and foremost. It's like Snopes, it's a fact checking exercise. You're basically finding out when was a document written, did it get interpolated, are the witnesses reliable, and stuff like that. That's really what it's all about. But so, with that introduction out of the way, you know the story. Let's get into it. So, this was a very interesting presentation of 7th century sources. And Mary presented this as like her sort of solid contemporary evidence that proves that the Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative existed. Now, the debate really was to do with, is the Muhammad of the Islamic tradition, did he exist? It's not, there could have been various people claiming to be a prophet in Iraq and Syria at the time. Don't doubt there probably were. Were there warlords at that time? Certainly. Nehemiah bin Huziel jumps out as one example. Were there people who were monotheistic? Well, of course, the majority of the population were. Paganism, by and large, had died out by the 3rd and 4th century. I don't hold to the fantasy that what we were dealing with in the 7th century was a predominantly pagan world. This is a standard Islamic narrative. It doesn't fit with the facts on the ground. There's a dramatic drop-off in pagan inscriptions from about the 3rd and 4th century. You still see the occasional one in the 7th century, but the degree in which they're there is very much down from the 3rd and 4th century. What you see predominantly is Christian and Jewish culture, by and large. So this is the data, and obviously there's a lot to go through, and it would probably take, just to fact check all of this, it would probably take weeks, and I'm busy writing a book, but I just looked at the bottom of the list and I thought, Arculf, okay, let's look at Arculf for argument's sake. And it's really, I picked that one probably because it was the easiest one to fact check straight off, because basically Mary says that Arculf mentions there were Arabs, okay, which is that red box on the left, and she also mentions there was an anti-Christian message. Now, it doesn't make clear if she means the Saracens or Muhammad or both, and I'm going to take the broadest interpretation, which is both. So either or both. I think that's very generous. Okay. So she confidently says that if you go to Arculf's account, that you'll find that he uses the word Arabs, and and uses the word anti-Christian. Now, nowhere in the talk does she say these are synonyms and that any old word will do. If it's loosely like the word Arab, or if it's loosely anti-Christian, or it could be just anti-Christian based on her interpretation of actions or whatever. But she doesn't say that. She says these words appeared. And this is the problem with playing fast and loose with data. If you present a table like this, you really have to stick to it, and there needs to be an asterisk next to Arabs if it's one of, I don't know, a dozen different terms that are going around at the time. All right. And also, she doesn't include the word Muslims there in the list, or Islam, but that's another matter. So that's the first one that is of interest to us. That bit there. The second one, which I'm actually going to start with first, is the Maronite Chronicle. Now, she makes a lot of claims here, and we're going to actually examine all four of them. She says it mentions Arabs, that it mentions Mahmed. Now, she says Muhammad, but actually it's Mahmed. Warmonger. Okay, now, it doesn't make clear, but I presume she's trying to make the argument that there was a person called Mahmed who was a warmonger. The fact that there were more warmongers in society at the time is not a huge surprise, and it doesn't support the standard Islamic narrative. In every century, there were warmongers. So really, that one can only be of use if it's to do with a biographical piece of information about Mahmed or Muhammad. Okay, so her claim really is there that those two elements are connected, that there was a person called Muhammad, and it claimed that he was a warmonger. Okay, that's an easy thing to check in the Maronite Chronicle. So she's done the work, she claims. She's checked all of this data out. She also claims that the Maronite Chronicle presents, not clear here, whether it's Muhammad or the Saracens as anti-Christian, or perhaps Muawiyah, so we'll say any one of those anti-Christian. So that's the claim. But does it stack up? So I'm going to debunk this, and I think she would do the same if I was making these claims and she didn't agree. So let's just have a look at the back and forth between us. So I challenge her, and I mentioned to her that dating these things don't take days. There was a little bit before this. I think I said something about it taking. It takes a lot of time. It's not a criticism, but it does take a lot of time to date these things. The fact stands that the argument hinges on accuracy. The Tayyei are a specific tribe, a subset of the much larger group Arab, and she's basically saying that they're all the same thing. There's an overlap, but it's a subset. Arculf doesn't say Arab or anti-Christian, but your table claims he does. Things like that matter. Okay, it is false and misleading. Emotive terms like fringe, etc., are not arguments. This is what she was throwing back at me. Facts need to be established. The section in Sebius on Mahmed is an interpolation. Professor Kerr has read it by a native speaker and said it was very obvious. Kind of jumps out. Okay, that's something I'll come back to at a later time, which is not the focus for today. But the key thing is she got two very easy to fact check claims there. That should have been easy for her to fact check herself before she presented this as data. Her response, this is a typical Mary thing. She brings in, what's the word? Analogy. That's the word I'm looking for. So Mary brings in an analogy. Again, this is not helpful because it all depends on whether the analogy is fitting or not, and it's a diversion. But she says, let me pick something that should be clear for your own background. England is named after the Angles, land of the Angles. So English, by your logic, can't refer to Edward the Confessor or Harold Godwinson. They were Saxons. Saxons were a different tribe than Angles. It's not relevant. This is we're dealing with a different context, a different history, a different time. We have a problem where we need to define who is the group that is being spoken about in our sources, because there are Christians, there are Jews, there are people who are maybe a hybrid amongst them. Getting the term correct is part of the data gathering that we need to do. And if we just start throwing around terms like they're interchangeable without any consideration of maybe they're not, maybe there's a reason why one word is picked over another, maybe we don't know everything about the groups at the time. So that's the problem. And I don't think Mary gets that. I think it doesn't matter. It's kind of fuzzy logic. Anything will do. Same as with the Hittite. It doesn't matter that it was pointed out numerous times during the debate that Hittites contradict each other. It didn't phase her at all. So fuzzy logic is not really the way to do things. Fact check, and be accurate as you can. So I basically wasn't diverted. I said, stick with the point. Being loose with the data is my issue. Saracen instead of Arab doesn't, I should have said, doesn't make a huge difference. But if you say a witness said X when they said Y, that's false. Be honest and strictly factual. It's crucial considering that a lot hinges on these minute details. So, asked her again, do you stand over that Arculf called them anti-Christian, or was that a synonym too? It's like trying to drag the truth out of her. So, what do you think she said? I think I did actually look for a point. I think she did say it. Maybe it's in the next one, but anyway, I'll go to this first. I think she did say it. She admitted, no, it doesn't say anti-Christian. We'll come to that in a second. One last chance. Can you confirm or deny that Arculf called them anti-Christians? Because the only group that I can find that he called... no, this is now in response to a message. I think she might have deleted this one, so I'm just responding to one that she deleted, I think. Because the only group I can find that he called infidels were Jews. So basically, she had said to me, no, it doesn't say anti-Christians, it says infidels. And so I said, now, are you sure? Does he call the Saracens infidels? Because the only group I can find that he called infidels were Jews. I've done a search for infidel, and it only appears 3 times. And you can see there, you got infidel. Okay. We are going to come back to this a little bit later. The next piece that we're going to look at is the Maronite Chronicle. Okay. Now, the Maronite Chronicle makes 4 claims, according to Mary. It refers to Arabs. It refers to Muhammad, or we'll grant Mahmed. It refers to warmonger, and it refers to anti-Christian. So it's basically it's saying that it talks about Mahmed. It talks about Mahmed and depicts him as a warmonger, and overall depicts the Saracens or the Muslims or the Arabs, whatever way you want to describe them, because obviously the word doesn't matter any longer. It describes them as anti-Christian. That's what she's claiming. Okay, so those are the 4 things. Does the Maronite Chronicle refer to Arabs? Does it refer to Mahmed or Muhammad? Does it refer to Mahmed being a warmonger? Does it depict them or him as anti-Christian? So those are the 4 things. There should be a question mark over that last one. But maybe we'll start with Muawiyah. Muawiyah is depicted doing warlike things, let's be honest. But then that's what leaders did pretty much for most of history. So it's nothing surprising there. But what about the idea that he kind of fits in with the standard Islamic narrative? Well, Muawiyah doesn't act like a Muslim, and this is clear from this piece from the Maronite Chronicle. So in 660 AD, many Arabs gathered at Jerusalem and made Muawiyah king, and he went up and sat down on Golgotha. He prayed there and went to Gethsemane and went down to the tomb of the Blessed Mary to pray in it. Does that sound like he's anti-Christian? Okay, he's leading a group of Arabs. If he's Christian or he's sympathetic to Christianity, then how come the Arabs aren't kicking up a fuss if that's the case? Now, it goes on. In those days, when the Arabs were gathered there with Muawiyah, there was an earthquake. Much of Jericho fell, as well as many nearby churches and monasteries. In July of the same year, the emirs and many Arabs gathered and gave their allegiance to Muawiyah. So even though he seems to be depicting himself as very sympathetic to the Christians, they gave their allegiance to him. Does that fit with what story we've been told by Muslims? Then an order went out that he should be proclaimed king in all the villages and cities of his dominion, and that they should make acclamations and invocations to him. All right. So that's it. That's that bit. So does the Maronite Chronicle refer to Arabs? Yes. Okay. Do you see there's Arabs is mentioned several times? So that's correct. Well done, Mary. Does it depict them or him as anti-Christian? So whether it be the Saracens in general or the Arabs in general, does it depict them as anti-Christian? Well, so far we haven't seen anything. It depicts Muawiyah himself very sympathetic. He's actually doing things that your average devoted Christian would do. He sat down in Golgotha. He prayed there, where Golgotha, remember, is where Jesus was crucified. That goes against the standard Islamic narrative. So he believes that Jesus was crucified. Otherwise, why would he pray there? He went to Gethsemane, the place where Jesus prayed before he was arrested and then crucified. And he went down to the tomb of the Blessed Mary to pray in it. So he reveres the mother of Jesus as well. Okay, he sounds like a pretty good Christian to me. Anyway, so is he anti-Christian? Definitely not. And the fact that the Arabs had no problem swearing allegiance to him doesn't really depict them as anti-Christian either, does it? All right, so not looking good so far. He got one. It's 1-1. Okay, he managed to get the word Arabs correct, but he's not anti-Christian, so that part is wrong. Okay. Now, another part is Muawiyah also minted gold and silver, but it was not accepted because there was no cross on it. Now that could be something. We'll come to that in a second. Furthermore, Muawiyah did not wear a crown like other kings in the world. He placed his throne in Damascus and refused to go to Mahmud's throne. Now, as I've explained in previous video, if we interpret Mahmud as being about Jesus, Mahmud's throne would be Jerusalem. This is the Christians often depict the cross as being the throne of Jesus, where Jesus rules from the cross. Okay, it would be the place where the Bishop of Jerusalem would be. So the Bishop of Jerusalem is pretty much a bit like Peter in a sense. It's a very key place. He's representing Jesus there in Jerusalem. But in any case, apart from that, it does mention Mahmud, but there's no biographical information. Does it mention anything else about him in the Chronicle? Anything about Mahmud? None. Nothing. No reference to any biographical information. So there's nothing in it to indicate that there's an actual historical person in the 7th century. This Mahmud's throne could easily be just referring to the Messiah's throne. Okay? Now, we should also bring in corroborating evidence. Okay? And we've shown this before, an inscription. We see here both a cross and and Ma'avia, which is Muawiyah, okay, depicted with a cross, okay, commander of the believers, servant of God. These are all terms that are very vague and could apply to anyone. No use of the word Islam, no use of the word Muslim, but there's a use of the cross, okay? Did Muawiyah need to put a cross in there? No. Okay. Now, Mary's argument, he had to do it for the Christians or they wouldn't accept it. And actually, it is mentioned there. Okay. So let's say we grant her that. Okay. But that's not the case with inscription. He could easily not put a cross there. He can do that at least. Okay, people mightn't accept coins without a cross, but he can do whatever he likes with an inscription. Mary doesn't seem to get that. Now, so how are we doing? Does it refer to Arabs? Yeah, she does get that right. Does it refer to Mahmed or Muhammad? Yes, it does. Does it give any biographical information apart from that about Mahmed? None. None whatsoever. Not about him being a warmonger, so that's false. Does it depict either him, Mahmed, well, as an anti-Christian? Well, obviously not if he doesn't include biographical information. Does it depict Muawiyah as an anti-Christian? No, it actually does the opposite. And the Saracens or Arabs? No, there's nothing there to indicate that. So there's nothing. So that's 50%. She got 50% right, which is a little bit better than the Arculf, but actually on the crucial bits, she's wrong. So there's nothing really there to build up to the standard Islamic narrative. Let's be honest. And by her own admission, this is a trustworthy 7th century source. All right. Now, Muawiyah also minted gold and silver, but it was not accepted because there was no cross in it. So that's the bit we have to sort out. Does this not dispute the claim that he was some kind of Christian, or at least sympathetic to Christianity? Okay, right. So the first problem for Mary is if her understanding is correct, proof of that would be that there's a coin with no cross on it. But actually, there is a coin has a symbol on it that some Christians would accept as being a cross, and a lot of Christians would not accept as being a cross. Okay? And that's the problem. The initial coin that he did, there was a problem with the inscription. It wasn't crossy enough. It didn't fit, certainly the Maronites. It didn't suit them. Okay? Because they have a very stylized cross. So that's the summary so far. Well, let's get into this. So the Maronite Chronicle, compiled circa AD 680, records in the entry for 660 that Muawiyah became caliph and minted gold and silver, but it was not accepted because it had no cross on it. So he had to have minted it. It wasn't just a suggestion that didn't happen. So there has to be coins with it, without the cross. And then the nature of the coin that we find fitting with that will tell us if we fully understand the description. He had no cross on it, whether we get it right or not, because it's all about looking at the coin and seeing what was actually happening exactly to have a good idea of what's going on. So this sentence has been the subject of much scholarly debate, but the only gold coins known today which might fit this description would be modified cross solidi, like the present specimen that I'm going to show you. And here it is. All right. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see no cross. Okay. On the right side, there's a thing there which it could indicate a denomination. If you remember that there's different denominations. Now, this could potentially be seen by some Christians as a cross and by others as not a cross. So if we look at it further description, now it was minted circa 40 to 72. All right, I think that should be AH. Egypt or Syria. The obverse has 3 standing figures based on Heraclius, flanked by Heraclonus and Heraclius Constantine, standing facing each wearing crowns and holding globes with crossbars removed. And then you have the reverse Victoria, modified cross-potent with top limb removed, set on 4 steps. So the top limb was removed, but you do have the cross part. So if you just go back, so if you look at the one on the right, you have a horizontal, but there's no upper part. Okay, so there it's kind of an ambiguous coin, and not sufficient to keep everyone happy. Okay, right. So this is considered a cross by some Christians. So we need to explore what the problem was. So here's a replica of the Tau cross. Okay, now this would have been okay for the Egyptians, who were the inventors of that type of shape. It's a pre-Christian shape that even the Orthodox today, the bishops carry a staff with that shape on it. So that would be okay for some, but not for others. So he minted gold and silver, but it was not accepted because there's no cross in it. Perhaps from the Maronite point of view, which is what the Maronite Chronicle is, it's a Maronite point of view, this wasn't sufficiently a cross to be accepted as such. The image down at the bottom right is what Maronites would consider a proper cross. All right. So it's ambiguous. Okay. Considering he's doing inscriptions with crosses, it doesn't seem to be that it's for anti-Christian reasons. And if you take into account all of his devotion elsewhere, I don't think we can make the argument just from this that he's anti-Christian, or that he was putting crosses just to keep the Christians happy. All right. So, in terms of the Maronite Chronicle, this is how it looks. We've got rid of 2 of the items there of the Maronite Chronicle, and we will return to Arculf's account in a second. Okay, that one there. Now, so back to Arculf. On being challenged about her data, TooManyMary's conceded Arculf didn't use the word Arab but used the word Saracens, and the excuse it was a synonym. Now that wasn't really a big deal, to be honest with you, but it's just been not sufficiently accurate. The second thing is she didn't concede that he never used the word anti-Christian about the Saracens, but infidel. Okay. Now this provides another chance to see if Muawiyah, the king of the Saracens, was anti-Christian as Mary claims. Does Arculf depict him in that way? Because we're going to actually read a depiction of Muawiyah here, a piece that I haven't seen before today. Okay. For the purpose of this investigation, it doesn't matter if the story of the shroud is true. What is revealing is how Muawiyah is depicted. So I personally believe that this story is true, at least broadly true, that there was a dispute about the shroud, and I do believe that it was probably a miracle and this is recorded and so forth. However, that's not necessary for the point, because all we are actually interested in for the purpose of this is how was Muawiyah depicted? Was he depicted like a Muslim? Was he depicted like a Christian? Was he depicted like someone who believes that Jesus was crucified? Or was he depicted like someone who believes, according to the standard Islamic narrative, that Jesus wasn't crucified and only pretended to be, or he was replaced by someone else, or things like that? Okay. So we start with the story of how the shroud is rediscovered. So this is from Arculf's account given to those in Iona who are writing it. So you'll see Arculf in third person because he gives the account and they write it up. Okay. Concerning the holy shroud of the Lord also, which was placed over his head in the sepulchre, we learned from the holy Arculf, who saw it with his own eyes, the following account, which we now set forth, and which all the people of Jerusalem assert to be true. For the holy Arculf got this statement on the testimony of very many of the faithful of Jerusalem, who often told it to him in these terms while he listened intently. The holy cloth, which a decent believing Jew had stolen from the Lord's sepulchre immediately after the resurrection and hidden at home about 3 years ago by favour of the Lord himself, was discovered after the passage of many years and came to the knowledge of the whole people. So he's basically saying the shroud was robbed by, it says, a believing Jew. Okay. It disappeared, and then just 3 years before Arculf, which Arculf is there in 670, so that would be 667, okay, AD. So this shroud kind of basically emerged out of the ether in the 7th century. It was discovered after the passage of many years and came to the knowledge of the whole people. Okay, so that's the story he's going to recount. Now, but when he was in his last extremity, that's the person who stole the shroud. That fortunate and believing thief summoned his 2 sons, showed them the Lord's shroud that he had originally stolen, and offered it to them, saying, "My sons, you now have a choice. Let each one of you say then what his wish is, so that I know for certain to which one of you, according to his wish, I ought to bequeath either all the substance I have, i.e. his wealth, or just this sacred shroud of the Lord." So basically, they have a choice. They can have all his money, all his possessions, all his property, or they can simply have just the shroud. But obviously, the only one who would accept the shroud is the person who actually believes it is what he claims it to be. Okay. On hearing these words from the lips of his father, one whose wish it was to get all his father's wealth took this from his brother, his father bequeathing it to him by will according to his promise. Wonderful to relate, from that day forward all his wealth and patrimony for which he had bartered the Lord's shroud began to dwindle, and everything that he had was dissipated in one way or another and reduced to nothing. So basically, the one who went for the wealth discovered that their wealth was wasting away. The other, however, blessed son of the above mentioned blessed thief, who preferred the shroud of the Lord to all the patrimony from the day that he received it from the hand of his dying father, by God's favour grew more and more prosperous, and was enriched even with earthly goods while not being deprived of heavenly ones. Okay, so the other son was doing really well for himself, the one who had the shroud, but the other one was doing really badly. And so, fathers born of the seed of this thrice blessed man kept handing on the Lord's shroud faithfully to their sons from one believing custodian to another, up to the 5th generation, by a sort of hereditary right according to the sequence of their line. Okay, so all was going well for 5 generations, okay, all believing custodians. And then it went from believing heirs to unbelieving heirs after these 5 generations. But after the time of the 5th generation, when, with the passage of many years, believing heirs of this line began to fail, the sacred shroud came into the hands of some Jewish unbelievers. They too, indeed, however unworthy of such an office, cherished it honourably, and by divine generosity became enriched to a high degree with goods of various kinds. So even though they didn't believe it is what was said to them it was, that it was the shroud of Jesus, God blessed them with generosity and wealth and so forth, just for looking after it, even though they didn't believe it. Okay, so that's the tale that Arculf received, but it goes on. But when the true story of the Lord's shroud became known among the people, the believing Jews began to contend boldly with the infidel Jews about the sacred cloth, seeking with all their might to get it into their hands. So you've now got Jews who do believe it is what it's claimed to be, versus those who basically don't believe in it but hold it. The rivalry aroused divided the people of Jerusalem into 2 factions. The faithful believers, that is, against the infidel unbelievers, right? So we can see clearly the infidel and the unbelievers part is nothing to do with anti-Christian. It's not specifying Saracens. It's basically really talking about the case of the two groups of Jews. All right. Upon this, the king of the Saracens, Mavias, now by name, which I've checked out to just confirm it is the Greek form of Muawiyah. It's not a Muawiyah from an earlier generation or time. It's talking about of the 7th century. Okay. So upon this, the king of the Saracens, Muawiyah by name, when invoked by both sides in judgment between them, said to the infidel Jews, who stubbornly held on to the Lord's shroud in presence of the Christian Jews. Now he calls the other Jews Christian because they believe that this shroud is genuine. Now it's whether they fully converted or not it's not clear there, but maybe they did convert as a result. I don't know. But he called them in any case Christian Jews to distinguish them from the infidel Jews that don't believe in the shroud there. Give into my hand the sacred cloth that you have. Now note context. The infidel unbelievers simply meant any who didn't believe it was the real shroud, in particular the non-believing Jews. Okay? Does Muawiyah sound like a Muslim to you in this description? Or and all of this is because Mary claims that Arculf depicts the Saracens as anti-Christian. Okay, they obeyed the behest of the monarch, took it forth from its reliquary, and laid it in his lap. The king took it with great reverence. Look at that, great reverence. Does that sound like a Muslim? And bade a pyre be prepared in the court before all the people. When it was burning with great intensity, he got up, went right up to the pyre, and said in a loud voice to the dissident parties, now let Christ, the Saviour of the world, who suffered for the human race, these are all, I presume, things a Muslim would say. I'm being sarcastic. Who had this shroud, which I now hold in my arms, placed on his head in the sepulchre. Judge by the flame of the fire between you who contend for this cloth, that we may know on which of these two contending bands he will deign to bestow such a gift. Okay? So he's basically saying, let Christ, who had this shroud on his head in the sepulchre, judge by the flame of the fire between the two groups, and which of these contending bands this should be given to. And so saying, he cast the Lord's sacred shroud into the flames, but the fire was completely unable to touch it. So we have an example of a miracle here. You can imagine why this story was doing the rounds in Jerusalem. Whole and unimpaired, it arose from the pyre and began to flutter on high like a bird with outstretched wings, gazing down from above on the two factions of the people, thus at variance with one another. Two armies set as it were in battle array. For a space of some minutes it fluttered about in the empty air, then gradually coming down it swerved by God's guidance toward the Christian party, who meantime kept beseeching Christ the Judge, and it settled in their midst. Lifting their hands to heaven, they give thanks to God with great rejoicing, and falling on their knees, they receive with great honour this venerable gift sent down to them from heaven. They render hymns of praise to Christ, its donor, and wrapping it in another cloth, deposit it in a reliquary in the church. One day our brother Arculf saw it raised up from its reliquary, and in the crowded church kissed it himself amongst the multitude of people who were kissing it. It measures about 8 feet in length. Let these remarks concerning it suffice. So I ask you, do you think TooManyMary's represented Arculf's account truthfully? Does he depict the Saracens' attitude to the Christians as anti-Christian? I would argue that Muawiyah showed reverence for this shroud, and as we can see from the words quoted, he says, "Now let Christ, the Savior of the world, who suffered for the human race, judge by the flame of the fire between the Jews." Okay? So he's claiming that Christ is the Savior of the world. Okay? The Furqan. Yeah? Christ is the Furqan, the Savior. He suffered for the human race. So he's not denying the crucifixion. Okay? He's showing that this shroud is proof of Jesus's crucifixion. Yeah? So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments below. I'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye.